Welcome to Therapist Uncensored, a podcast where therapists freely speak their minds about real-life matters.
Hi, y'all. This is Therapist Uncensored, and this is episode 74. I am Ann Kelly, and Sue and I are currently working on season 3, which we think is going to be a great one. And to give us some time to do it, we are replaying some of our most favorite or popular old episodes for listeners, so that in case you missed it, you get a chance to hear it and or get to hear it again and take it all in on a deeper level. So before we get started, I want to do a shout out. We have added SpeakPipe to our website. So if you go to www.therapistuncensored.com, you will see a blue button on the side. It'll come up right away, super easy. Pop on that button and you can leave us a 90-second voicemail. So we are excited to use that because not only would we love to hear from our listeners and stay engaged, in doing so, you can be intricately part of our next season if you have some recommendation or ideas or desires, and or leave us a voicemail and you might actually hear your voice live in our new season. All right, today's episode, Sue is going to interview Tina Adkins. And we brought this episode in because Dr. Adkins is a research associate at the University of Texas at Austin in the School of Social Work, and she specializes in attachment-based interventions. And she studied under Peter Fonagy and Patrick Luton at the University College in London and the Anna Freud Centers. And so she has a wealth of knowledge, and in this episode, Sue and Tina discuss the concept of mentalizing. And mentalizing is a critical component of being able to relate in a secure way. And so what they give us in this episode, not only they're going to start off with a discussion of just the baseline of how attachment develops in kids. And for the longtime listeners, this will be just a familiar reminder. And for new listeners, it'll be a bit of an overview. And then they pretty quickly jump into talking about using mentalizing in the everyday world as a strategy for developing deeper connections with ourselves and relating to the world with a skill that involves more security. Sometimes we, no matter what our base of attachment style is, we unintentionally relate in a really insecure way, both to ourselves and to other people. And the concept of mentalizing is a great reminder and strategy for how to get to a deeper level of connection to yourself and other people. So we think you're going to love it. All right, so let's get started.
We are very excited today to have a very special guest with us who's going to take us right into the heart of the research on attachment. So if you haven't heard about metacognition and reflective function and mentalization, you're going to be an expert by the end of this episode. So just while you're listening, just know that part of why we brought Tina on the show today is that she has got some real data, and her experience is evidence-based. Mm-hmm. And so these aren't just somebody's good ideas. And where they are somebody's just good ideas, we'll tell you the difference between that and what we actually know. But let's just start with a bigger framework in case somebody hasn't heard more about Therapist Uncensored and been listening and following along about attachment.
Sure.
What's the big deal?
The big deal?
Why'd you go all the way to London?
Right. Yes. Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the things that I realized was that I was working with, many of these sort of dysfunctional families or children that are being abused or neglected. And so if you go back to the basic question of, why are these parents treating their children so horribly, or even just, not great, spanking, things like that, things that I didn't like to see. And I knew from working with these parents that they themselves had been traumatized. They had a background that nobody was addressing. Nobody was talking about the intergenerational transmission of trauma or any of these things yet. And so already I knew that this was a parent who had been a child, and they had experienced their own history that nobody was addressing, and now they are parenting their own child, not just how they were parented, but through the eyes of perhaps a damaged child, their own inner damaged child. So already I knew that things weren't being addressed. And I knew attachment was important in the sense of, I learned a little bit about it in the classroom, knowing that if you had been securely attached as a baby, that your outcomes in life were much better. You had higher IQ, you had improved mental health, you were able to make relationships and have successful jobs. And so I'm like, what is this magic secure attachment?
It's like an elixir.
It's elixir. But it's measured at 12 months. So I'm like, well, we have all these kids in and they're older. So what do we do then? So there's a lot of questions about that. Like, I didn't know, and I wanted to know a lot more. And so going to the source, John Bowlby studied in, he was from London. And so going to the Anna Freud Center, which is definitely an international center that studies attachment and child welfare and families, was so helpful for me. I learned things I just had no clue about. And it just took me on a deep, deep level of understanding attachment and families and all these things. So on the most basic level, that's what it is that they've shown, research has shown that when a child has a safe, loving connection, basically the idea of a secure attachment is that it provides safety, comfort, and pleasure. Those are the three things that secure attachment provides in the most basic sense between parent and child.
Safety, comfort, and pleasure.
Those three different kinds of pillars, right? But those three elements sort of are the hallmark of a securely attached child and parent. What I like to tell people is that this is something that follows you throughout your life. All your best relationships you find in life, if you look at your relationships right now and reflect on perhaps that's how you chose your spouse, they provide safety, comfort, and pleasure for you. If one of those is missing, then there's, typical issues. But anyway, so following that path out, there, outside of secure, on the opposite of that spectrum is insecure, right? There's this, okay, well, what if something's missing? What if a parent is not providing this or a child is insecurely attached? And there's a lot of details underlying that, but the basic is that child does not feel safe. They certainly aren't always feeling comforted, or there's no pleasure. There's a lot of other factors in there. But from a research perspective, if I measure an infant at 12 months old and they are insecurely attached to their parent, and you just follow that child and parent through the rest till they're 18 and do nothing else, no intervention, nothing, then that child has a much higher chance of having mental health issues, of having drug and alcohol issues, physical health issues. And they're able to trace it back to 12 months old having insecure attachment.
And one of the really cool things I remember hearing about is that you can predict a child's attachment status by the attachment status of the parent before the child is born.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
That's the research they did at the Anna Freud Center. They interviewed pregnant mothers, right? They gave them the adult attachment interview. And they found that if they gave them a sort of if they gave them a designation of like an insecure, it's not the term, but insecurely attached adult, they would predict at 12 months their infant would be insecurely attached.
In the same way that
they were. And that at 18 years, that child had poor outcomes compared to secure. All from an interview with a pregnant mother. So before she even has a child, they could essentially predict how that child would have, or their mental health issues or anything like that at 18 years old. Shocking to me. Powerful.
And this isn't genetics.
No, this is outside of genetics. They controlled for poverty and mental health issues and all kinds of other things. That's right. And what that showed me, or what one element of that became very powerful for me in deciding how to, create interventions or research, was that the relationship was one of the key factors of how we become healthy in this world. The relationship with your primary caregiver, the actual relationship. So in her mind, as this pregnant mother being interviewed, had already an internal model of relationships. And that's how she was presenting her answers. And that's how she was fantasizing her child and all of these things. That was the most important factor, more than anything else.
And they measure it through the narrative style. Mm-hmm. It's not, and you all ongoing listeners know about this, but it's not what has happened to us, but what the sense that we've made of it. And it's not what the mother was saying. It's how, in a sense, it's how she's speaking and how she comes to make sense of it. But just as a quick little asterisk, also what's interesting is that, as we go forward in the research, it's not true that every parent that scores that way has this. And it's also not true that if your child has early developmental issues that they always will. So one of the things Tina said that I think is really important is that that's without any intervention, without knowing anything. And there's a lot of, so it's not a perfect correlation, but because it's so robust. So that I just know that as a parent, as I began to listen and read about this stuff, I got so paranoid.
Oh, I know.
Tremendously paranoid.
One of the first things I tell parents is, look, it just to ease your mind, it doesn't matter what happened to you as a child. You could have had the worst upbringing in the world. It's how you process it now. It's how, which to me is very hopeful. It's not about what happened to you. It's about how you've dealt with it now. Have you been able to process it? Have you been able to, like you said, how do you talk about it? How do you feel about it? Think about it. And that can be changed at any time in life.
Well, that's where that is exactly. So we're going to narrow in on a specific thing. One, Tina, can you talk to us about the general concept, and then also, can we just start, I guess,
of
there?
Like reflective functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So this is one piece of it that the data shows really is a powerful influencer on both creating insecurity when it's not there, but also promoting security when it's present.
Yes. So one of the things they were researching at the Anna Freud Center in London was this idea of, okay, great, we know that secure mothers sort of create secure babies or influence secure babies, but how? What are they doing?
Right. Maybe they're just very nice.
Yeah. They're just sweet. Are they loving? And there was an original term called sensitive parenting. Maybe they're super sensitive. But when they really studied it, that wasn't explaining the variation.
Another cool thing I heard, just as an aside, that it really helps bring, because I thought secure kid, like secure people, that's like Bigfoot. Like, is it really out there?
Does it really exist? Yeah.
But it really does. And people talked about like a mother that had even 10 kids and not a lot of resources can produce 10 secure children.
Yes.
Just naturally. It's almost like the natural thing that would happen if you've already had the benefit of it happening to you.
Yes, you have. So that's sort of what where we're narrowing in on is this idea of what is the factor. And Peter Fonagy and his team in London came up with this idea of parents seem to talk to their children and talk about themselves in a specific kind of way, which shows they have a high ability at something called reflective functioning. That is sort of the research term. The concept, really, the overarching concept is called mentalization. They have these great ability, that's mentalizing skills. That's a very odd term, mentalization. You don't hear about it much. But what it really means is that I'm able to see inside the mind of another person. I'm curious about their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs and their expectations. I'm thinking about their experience inside of their world. And at the same time, I'm thinking about my experience. So I am paying attention to what's inside your mind. Meanwhile, I'm paying attention to my reactions, my thoughts, my feelings. So it's almost like a dynamic situation. It's not just empathy.
Yeah, well, that's a complex thing to do. You know, when you get upset, you're just really kind of want to be just focused on you're upset.
You can't. That's the problem, right? It's the idea is in ideal interaction is I'm paying attention to what's in your mind while I'm paying attention to what's in my mind. There's a wonderful phrase that Fana uses called basically, I see myself from the outside and my child from the inside. So you're able to kind of do that at the same time, which I think is really lovely. But there's this idea, though, that it's a cognitive element, right? I'm actually able to think about what you're feeling and think about all those things. But also there's an emotional regulation element, just like you said. So when I'm really pissed off or angry, it shuts down your ability to mentalize. It's very difficult to see inside somebody else's mind if you are angry at them or that if they feel threatening to you. And that's normal. We don't mentalize 100% of the time, but we all seem to have an ability to mentalize somewhat. And what the research showed when they really narrowed it down was that parents that had secure attachment and had children who were securely attached had this very high ability to mentalize consistently. And that was and that's been shown consistently now through the research to be a pretty powerful element of a parent who can transmit this to their child. And then they found that children that's how children develop the ability to mentalize. They have to be mentalized by another caregiver. An adult has to do this with them for them to develop this ability. And since it is related to attachment and things like that, empathy and things like that, that's why sometimes you see children who have histories of trauma and insecure attachment aren't always sensitive to other children, right? That you talk about the lack of empathy to other children, because empathy is a component of mentalization, but it's also a cognitive skill, if that makes sense. So my thought was, hey, I work with a lot of older children. I'm not working with a lot of babies necessarily. I'm working with older children in foster care, foster parents trying to manage the relationship and the behavior with these children. It's kind of all a mess sometimes. Can we actually develop this skill in parents? And will this transmit to children? And is this something we can do outside of the therapy room? And that was really the big thing for me, because I work with a lot. When I was working in the foster care arena, and I still do in the foster family arena in Texas, there's limited resources for foster families. The children can sometimes have individual therapy, but this is a relational skill, and this is a relational issue. So it's something that has to happen between parent and child.
So for those of you who follow Dan Siegel and the IPNB, Tina Bryson, interpersonal neurobiology, the term that they use is mindsight. Yes. But it's I think it's an interchangeable, it's the same idea of being able to get in someone else's mind and hold on to yourself at the same time. Some of us are really great at merging and being able to be very sensitive and know what other people are feeling, but we lose ourselves. And then other folks can be kind of consumed with, down regulating and keeping people out in order to stay calm. Yes. And, one of the things that, like when we look at folks that, like part of why that this is difficult in our adult life and where we see it happening with couples and things like that, is that it's actually a good idea if you're a child and your parent isn't mentalizing and they're giving you a lot of anger or aggression or blaming you or not understanding you, for you to shut down those capacities, whatever capacities that are already there, is actually a healthy, secure,
protective
mechanism.
It's a protective,
that's right. It's an adaptation.
Yeah.
And so kind of getting that to turn back on or developing it to begin with sounds like it's part of your interest.
Yeah. This idea was that, okay, I know that parents, foster parents in particular, and adoptive families struggle with developing these new relationships with these children. And we know from the research that there's not a lot of research done about foster children or foster parents, but that foster children come into care with a higher rate of insecure attachment which makes sense, right? They come from a history of trauma, of course. So they're already coming in with an internal model of relationships is unsafe and all these things, right? And then we don't know much about foster parents at all. But what little research has been done out there, in particular by Mary Dozier, has shown that perhaps foster parents have a higher rate of insecure attachment, but we don't really know. So I don't really know where these parents are in their adult attachment status or anything like that. But I know if mentalizing is a skill that increases the chances of developing a securely attached relationship, you can't go wrong with trying to increase the skill level of parents that are working with traumatized children and see if we can increase their ability to have reflective functioning and to transmit that to a foster child. So that's kind of where that idea was born, was, okay, I had been taking clinical classes in mentalizing-based therapy that comes out of London, mentalizing-based treatment for families and adolescents. And I realized that a core component of that therapy is psychoeducation, because you kind of have to explain why it matters for parents to have buy-in, right? It's even in therapy. Why should we even care about this stuff? Why should we learn about this stuff? So once I realized that, and I realized, I'm working in Texas with foster parents who have no access to their own therapy or therapy like that with their child, but they are required to have a certain number of training hours every year. So that's when sort of the light bulb came on, and I was like, can I create a true psychoeducation training? Not just information. I'm not just shoving information at them, but I'm giving them a training where we are talking and we're going a little deeper. We are going deeper into the world of looking at yourself and your child and the relationship and practicing mentalizing skills, increasing actual skills in being able to communicate with your child.
So can you give us an example of like what a mentalizing skill might look like?
Yes.
Or some of the practice.
Sure. So for instance, and it sounds really simple. And this is why I always say that everybody sort of have these abilities. It's about pulling out and using them in the right moment. So an example of an exercise, it might be that you imagine that we have a scenario on the where I'm explaining where I'm saying, hey, imagine that you have a new partner in your life and you're dating them. You've only been out with them a few times and you're really into them, but it's not quite serious yet. Okay. And one weekend you're out with your friends and you're at a restaurant and you see that person with somebody else and it looks like they're having an intimate dinner. So the first thing I ask you to think about, and you can think about this right now as you're listening to this, is what's your first gut reaction? What's your feeling? Are you mad? Are you suspicious? Are you curious? Are you like, I don't know what's going on? So the first thing is the self-reflection of mentalizing your own gut reactions to that scene. And when you're in a classroom and when you're talking about this with a variety of people, what you start to realize is everybody has a different response. There is no one response. Some parents are instantly angry at this scene. They are mad. They are furious. Some are like, I don't really know yet what's happening. Already you see that we are thinking or already making up an idea of what's happening between this person we care about and a stranger. And we're either getting defensive and angry about it. We have the worst case scenario in our head, or we have a different idea of what's happening. So that's the first thing. And then we talk about, for instance, okay, what would you then do? What would be your next step? And then you get all kinds. If you think about it, what would you do? Would you go up? Would you confront? Would you leave? Would you sit there? Would you think about it? So many variety of responses. And then there's this idea of where do those come from? And then we can talk about internal working models of relationships and how it relates to the way you were parented and all kinds of things. But in the end, our ideas, our ability to mentalize the situation and be open and flexible and curious about all the different capacities or all the different ideas of what could be happening in this scene will determine what we actually do. So for instance, the parent or the person who's listening and says, oh, I would immediately go up and confront them. I'm mad. What we discover in this scenario is that this partner of yours is actually meeting with their sibling that they hadn't seen in a long time, who came out of town last minute. So here they are having a lovely, intimate little dinner. And you have perhaps now just ruined the relationship by going up and being a little crazy, as they like to say, right? It's like, so your ability to stay open and curious and flexible and truly mentalize the situation in terms of keeping an open mind, essentially, and being able to control and emotionally regulate yourself and your behavior is what dictates how successful your relationships will be in this world.
Let's take a quick moment to thank our sponsor. For those listeners out there that are therapists, most of us want to spend our time with our clients and not with the tedious paperwork and billing, scheduling, etc. Theranos provides practice management software that can really help and has helped thousands of therapists out there better manage and grow their practices. Now, they've set up a special offer just for our listeners. You can try Theranos for free and then receive 20% off your first 3 months if you sign up at theranos.com/therapist-uncensored, or go to our website and you can click on it from there. Thanks.
I love that example. I was just totally putting myself in it. It's great. You say something that even just that example, what's implied in it is even just hearing everybody else having a different reaction.
Yes.
You come to understand that your personal reaction is simply that, and that you're having beliefs. And so even the difference between this is actually happening, that cheater, to, I'm thinking that he's or she is a cheater. Like just that movement.
That's
alone,
a leap.
That's a big leap. That I'm having beliefs and that I'm having reactions versus when we are in it, sometimes that's gone. and it's all very just concrete and literal. So just the idea that different people could have the same stimulus and have different reactions is a beautiful, just beginning example of mentalization, right?
Yeah, it's just allowing, and so the idea of somebody who's a successful mentalizer, somebody who has these high ability, leaves that space to be able to think about their feelings, to feel, to actually feel, to take a moment and process what's happening, to keep an open mind about what's happening, which can be a very difficult thing to do if you're triggered, if you have a history of trauma, if you've had, you can imagine that everybody has a different reaction. And it's fascinating to me to hear them all and opening the minds of saying that the minute we make it super personal without really, what's the only way to really know what's happening here? The only way is to literally have a conversation with that person in an open and flexible way to find out what's really going on. If you run in and attack, if you run in and confront, shuts them down, shuts you down. And I use this as an example because it's very relatable and it's sort of non-triggering in many ways because it's just a general situation. But it happens every day between parents and kids. Right. Parents will be triggered by their kids. Kids will. I hear parents all the time, my friends even, not even just foster parents, who are just like, he's really just trying to get back at me, which could be true, could not be true. But once you decide, you know exactly what they're doing or what's inside their head without actually talking about it, then you shut down your mentalizing, actually. So,
well, in some ways, this is very challenging, what you're talking about. It sounds simple on one level.
I know.
But you have to move from knowing, which is a very comfortable place to be. Yes. My righteous indignation is...
That's right. I know my kids.
Exactly. And it's just unexamined, but it feels really good to be in it. And you have to give that up and move back to a place of not knowing, which is actually a much more... we've talked on this podcast a lot about the biology of this and the science related to the neurobiology. So that's really literally moving into a different area of the brain, moving up. So from a limbic response to more of a prefrontal cortex response, where now you're able to reflect on your heart rate and the blood coursing through your body. And we've talked about it before as like a crow's nest on a boat, you know what I mean? Where the guy goes up and he has binoculars and he can he can kind of see what's going on. Mm-hmm. We can't necessarily stop it, but we can begin to reflect on it. And that in and of itself, it changes neurologically where it's coming from. But what I really like to think about is it is giving up something, because to not be reflective feels really good.
It's true. It's like control. It's security in some ways, emotionally.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. But we're brittle.
Yeah.
We're not open.
Right. Well, I mean, some of the hallmarks of mentalizing are perspective taking, curiosity, the unknowing, being uncomfortable with the uncertainty, and be willing to explore it in the moment. And it's much easier to do when things are calm and nice and pleasant. It's much harder to do when your child just mouthed off at you,
Absolutely.
And then it's like exploring your triggers, right? Yeah, the sass. But some things, we talk a lot about triggers with parents. Is some things bother you, like, for instance, kids lying to me doesn't really irritate me as much as it does some parents. Some parents, it's a huge trigger, lying.
Yes.
Right? Or it just depends. And so where do those triggers come from? Why am I not personally offended by the child's lie, but you are? Right. It's fascinating to think about, but it's also necessary to fully mentalize, to not sort of overreact or react in the moment. So this is actually a way which I'm really discovering the more and more I deliver the training and the intervention, is that parents are telling me it's a way to help them emotionally regulate themselves, which I find fascinating because that is the hardest thing to do. And we always say, take 10 breaths and breathe. But there's a cognitive element in there too.
Yeah, there's more to it.
If you personally feel offended or threatened, then you're not going to take time to breathe. You're going to go on the defensive. You're going to protect yourself or what have you. A lot of this is unconscious, but some of it you can control.
Well, I love that because it brings in the intersection of the biology and unconscious forces and then cognition. and how they all interplay, because it might be that without the breath, we aren't able to catch the curiosity,
True.
But you're right that even if we're sitting there breathing, but we stay in the exact same
State
cognitive
of mind.
space, the breathing isn't going to do it.
That's right.
It's
Because
a
you
pause.
know that
That's
you're
right.
being threatened
That's right.
and you were going to respond appropriately.
So that the breathing, in a sense, gives a chance for reflection to begin to ease back in. And again, that happens typically when we feel a little safer. But also what I love about what you're doing, Tina, is that expanding that capacity. So it's not just when I'm calm, I can do it, but we want to grow it in people so that even when you're not calm, you can kind of work your way back to it.
And that was the question, because to be honest, I mean, obviously, since I'm a researcher, I'm really curious about how things work, but also I am a clinician and I love teaching and I'm developing these interventions. So I'm with the parents and I'm in the classroom and I'm experimenting with these different methods of what really works at home, because I'm not there with you. I can't go home with you. I don't really know what's happening. So what I've learned, at least so far, is that I don't know for sure, but the data is very promising, this idea that practicing while you're calm, while you're in the classroom in a safe place with perhaps other people that understand you or not, but so far that's how I'm doing it, right? These are with a group situation, small groups, 10 to 15 parents. They're all in the same boat, essentially, and they're practicing. And then they're reporting that they're going home, and in the middle of a difficult moment, they're able to do this when they weren't able to do it before. And that to me is surprising. I'm hoping it sticks, but it tells me something that perhaps they don't even have to practice in a difficult moment, but by just practicing, sort of like meditation, by changing the brain or changing the way that we think about things, that you can't help, but then it changes you. It changes you, perhaps.
I love that, that the mind changes the brain and the brain changes the mind, and it's just this interplay.
Yeah. So I have this story of a parent a number of years ago who went through the intervention, and she was a longtime foster parent. She fostered teens, and often difficult teens. And this was a 3-class. We had 3 classes that we did, and this was after the second class. And she said that something happened. And so she told me this story about she has this teenager who is 17 and has been quite difficult, lots of behavior problems. And she was about to ask her to leave the home, because what was happening was she was going to school and fighting and getting suspended. And then the parent would have to take off work. And it was just wreaking havoc. And the parent was telling me, the mom, she was like, look, this child makes me angry. And this child would come. So every time this happened, the general thing was she'd come home, they'd have an argument about it, she'd get a consequence. You can imagine, how this would go down. And so she was telling me, so I got the call from the principal, it's suspended again. I was so angry. The child came home. She's like, but something changed in me. I'm like, well, what happened? And she's like, well, I was still angry, but I was really, for the first time, really curious about what was going on inside of her. And it's not that she wasn't curious at other times, but what I mean is that she was curious during a volatile, angry moment. And that was fascinating to me. So she said, I was very curious. And I told her, I said, this is what the mom was reporting to me. She said, I said to my child, I'm angry and we need to talk about stuff. But more than that, I'm really concerned about you. And I'm really curious what's going inside your mind. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's going on for you? You're so angry. I don't understand. And she said for the first time, the child just melted in front of her and all the anger disappeared. And she said, I'm not even angry, Mom. I'm actually really, really sad. And then she told her she had a plan to kill herself. And this foster mom told me she doesn't think she would have ever discovered this plan or any of this stuff if she hadn't talked to her in that way and hadn't been curious and really, and that I get goosebumps just thinking about it today. And she was genuinely thankful that she has now had a shift in her mindset. She's thinking differently about herself, about her child. So even though she was angry, just by sort of thinking about things differently and maybe practicing in class, she was able to shift her viewpoint in the moment, in a very critical moment for this child.
That's an incredible story. Yeah. It just resonates as so true. And I know in my own parenting moments when I've been able to make that shift, I have some adolescents, and
yes, you do. You have a couple of them.
And, sometimes what they're putting out to the world isn't really what's going on, but it's so easy to just be responsive to just that.
Of course.
And, these are great, great kids. But it's the softening. There really is. I mean, it even feels different when you make the shift that I'm going to get out of this power struggle with you. And it physically feels different.
It does.
And they, I think, can feel it. And then now you have soft instead of hard. And we don't have to worry about all the other stuff for a moment.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about mirror neurons or any of those things I'm sure you've talked about before, it's a mutual process. And so these parents report to me that they themselves are being regulated by being able to do this with their child, which I find really interesting. And as I like to say that it's a great point you said about behavior, because especially the older they get, the more we tend to focus on behavior and what they're saying, especially when it's negative. And there's always something behind the behavior. And being that sort of emotional detective, as I like to say, going a little deeper.
I love that. There's this idea of the symptom is a solution. Mm-hmm. And so that just, again, immediately, if you could imagine a little light bulb going on over your mind, that just that thought even is like, what's the solution for? Like not making a choice. Well, that's a solution. Or, whatever the behavior is that you're struggling with, like if you just begin to click it that way versus the other,
right?
Like you've opened up this, we've talked a lot on this podcast about taking a pause and this auto-regulation and things like that. But I love this piece because it's a very specific what to do.
What to do.
Instead of all this what not to do and how things are screwed up.
Yes. And there's this sort of, parenting traumatized children, foster parenting is a unique thing, but it's also just parenting. A lot of it is simply how to deal with behavior problems and how to deal with tantrums and a lot of things that a lot of parents want to know how to deal with. And as I like to say, it's like these are sort of ways to increase your own toolbox, your skill level, so that you can deal with issues individually, because I can't tell you what to do. You have to figure that out on your own. But everybody wants to feel better about their relationship. They want something that reaches deeper. They just don't know how to do it.
That's just great.
So,
in just a moment, if there's anything more specific too that you would like to give suggestions or ways to facilitate it.
Yes.
But just to clarify for everybody how cool this is, that part of what Tina is working on is being able to deliver these kind of interventions in these like power shots and this small amount of time without therapy, without any clinical intervention, but with care and kindness and truth. And be able to really make, hopefully what we're hoping for is real change within the parent that then translates into the family.
Yeah. And so far the intervention is roughly 8 hours, broken up into a couple classes and over several weeks. So they have time to practice and process. But I will tell you that I'm working with a number of researchers and a lot of interest in translating it into different, it's applicable to any parent really. So right now I'm working with a couple of researchers at Wayne State University. They do a lot in this area, and we want to adapt it for military moms when the parents deployed, substance abusing moms, parents, it could be mom or dad, but there's a lot of sort of complementary. It could be used in conjunction with therapy, or hopefully can it make a difference even on its own, especially with relatively well-functioning parents, I'm sure the more extreme. Just in terms of things you could do at home, I think it's sort of, there's starting to use questions for yourself and your parents. So for yourself and your children. So starting to think about, be curious about why they did what they did. What's behind their behavior? What are the emotions behind the behavior? What were they thinking when they said that? What were they feeling?
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like, what were you thinking?
No, you're not saying it. You're actually doing it. You're doing, what I like to say is, if in the moment you may not be able to do it. So later on, when you have a calm moment, this is when you think about it.
So it's not too late.
It's not, no. So you think about it later and you say, hey, what was he really thinking or feeling when he did all that? Why did I react that way? Why was that a trigger for me? What, am I cranky? Am I sleepy? Am I hangry? What's going on with me? And why am I doing this? So it's just being curious and starting that process. But even in the moment, if you're able to, when you're in a difficult place with a child, being able to sort of stop and think and say, hey, I know, a great example is if they're misbehaving and they're having a moment where, they're really angry. They have to go to school. They're resisting. They're having a whole tantrum or sort of a little tantrum or whatever. And you're able to kind of just stop for the moment and really attune to them and connect with them on their eye level and say, I see you really angry and I'm really curious about that. I want to know more. I want to know more. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Is there any way I can help right now? We still have to go to school, but is there any way that I can help you feel better? It's just, that's the most basic sense of everybody wants to feel known. We want to feel somebody's thinking about us. We want to think somebody's really curious about us and invested in us. And these are not always the way we talk to children. And it can make a huge difference. I've seen it time and time and again of taking a tantrum down a whole level by simply connecting with the powerful emotion in the moment, acknowledging it, and really showing an effort to mentalize them as that. But in that moment, you have to be able to regulate yourself. And that's the difficult part. And so this is where I find parents really struggling, which makes a lot of sense. They're really angry. But like this woman said, she was angry, but she had sort of been already thinking about it before the child came home from school. So she was angry. She was kind of probably rehearsing the things she was going to say to her when she came home. But then all this sort of came back to her from the classroom. And she was like, okay, I'm still angry. That's not going away. But I've opened my mind enough. I've been able to regulate enough to see there's other things going on here. It's not just this child acting out and misbehaving and trying to get kicked out of the home or all the different things I think are going on. There's something else there, and I just don't know what it is.
That's great. That is great. So I particularly like what you're saying about being able to get those wheels spinning away from the child so that you're more primed when you're with them to think in that way, even if you're a little dysregulated.
Yeah.
Another technique that I understand or that I have recommended is even when you have toddlers, little bitty ones that aren't speaking, but they're learning language, that it's recommended to just mentalize out loud.
Yes.
Instead of just book or whatever.
Yes.
Like I'm opening the refrigerator. I'm thinking about what to have. You know what I mean? And that you just sort of narrate what you're thinking and your perspective and shifts. And we could do this or we could do that. And I'm tired from work, so I'm not going to cook. And that you just say out loud what is just crossing your mind. And that is a way to promote mentalizing.
Well, it's interesting you say that because that's one of the first things they discovered with parents and infants. The secure parents were actually mentalizing their infant. And what that meant was they were as they're talking and cuddling and diapering their infant, they were saying things to them like, oh, I wonder what you're thinking right now. Or did you like that? Your face doesn't look like you like that, but maybe you did. And they're really curious because they don't have words. So they have no idea what's going on inside that infant, but they're open and they're curious, as opposed to some parents, which especially the more challenged parents, which you could watch and they felt like the baby, for instance, if the baby was angry at them and was specifically
doing this to them,
giving a revenge poop or something like that, right. Which is, that's a little more obvious. We can see that as being, wow, that's a bit of a leap. Yeah, that is a bit of a leap, but we do it with older kids all the time and we don't see it as a leap.
That's right.
And that's why I like to work on those. It's more obvious. With the babies, it's a little easier to see, but it's harder to see with older children.
Well, this is so exciting. And the application of this, like you said, is so wide. And yet the research is new. And
it is new.
So there's so much still to learn. But for those listeners who would be interested in reaching out to you, and first of all, in the show notes, we're going to have plenty, as we always do, of resources and more information on this.
Sure.
And maybe some articles.
Absolutely.
And give you more data, because we can always dive deeper with Therapists and Uncensored. But also, if they want to reach out to you directly, can you share?
Yes, please. I have a website that has a lot of general information about the interventions called Family Minds. And if you go to the website, www.familyminds.org, you can find information about the intervention and what mentalizing is. There's some little videos with Fonagy on it and just some real basic stuff, which is nice. You can reach me at tina.adkins, that's A-D as in David, K-I-N-S @gmail.com. And then if you're interested in any of the London stuff, I would just recommend going to the Anna Freud Center's website, annafreudcenter.org, or just Google it, to be honest. That's the best way to get there because they spell their words different, like centers with R-E, not E-R. Anyway, so you can explore a little deeper there as well and read more about the research and clinical interventions and things like that. So
that's great. And for those of you following, we've been talking about doing a course, and one of the metacognition is another way of saying this. It's one of the 3 pillars for adults. When we treat adults, what we want to do to promote earn security, and we love earn security around here. That's our favorite thing. We want T-shirts, and
Right.
So this is a really, really important concept that we're getting to do a deep dive.
So it'd really be great to figure out if even increasing mentalizing skills then changes your own internal
working
security.
Model. Yes,
It would be really fascinating to figure that out eventually.
Absolutely. Love it, love it, love it. And I had mentioned this to Tina before we got on, but when there's a whole organization that was developed just out of this, a little footnote that where Fonagy said that in 6 weeks that low-income mothers can be taught this skill. So we don't have to be in therapy for years and years and years and years, or even in a secure relationship necessarily. But if you notice, those are mentalizing is some of the things that happen in these secure relationships that ends up converting us. But this is a much more direct, specific intervention, so we can do it faster, which we always want to do, right?
It's like one significant
Speed
skill.
it up.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually the mentalizing based therapies are meant to be short term as well. And so those are kind of cool. But
fast and furious. Great. So thanks for listening. If you would like to hear more, like I said, check out the show notes, and please join our email list. You can find that at therapistsuncensored.com, and absolutely subscribe to your favorite podcast player. And if you haven't yet, rate us and review. That's always super helpful. And last suggestion, not to throw too many at you, but if you want to get a little more information about all of this, Tina is on our Therapist Uncensored online community. She's one of the members. And we might be doing some cool stuff together live to get more of this out there and take questions and everything. So keep your questions coming and your feedback and your comments. We're super open, and we can use those if we are able to make this work to be able to do something on the Facebook page and go live and interact more directly.
And also, I'm actually a researcher at University of Texas. I don't know if we mentioned that. So I'm in the School of Social Work. And so that's where I have a page in there somewhere as well. So
that's awesome. Good. Okay, because our listeners often are very smart and intelligent about these things and want to know more. So there you go. Hope that we've done a good job of delivering that. And thank you very much for listening. Again, share this freely, and we will see you around the bend.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.